Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Rich Allen and Adam White. So, we put away our costumes and our fireworks for this year at least and start thinking about putting up those stockings. But who's already looking forward to a winter break and who seems to be already on this? More of that and the latest in Ligue after the latest headlines. On Friday, high-flying Lille had their wings clipped a little in a relatively uneventful 0-0 draw at home to Strasbourg. That was made up on Saturday as the early game saw Lyon come from behind to win 4-2 against bottom side Guingamp. Marcus Thuram scored twice in Jocelyn Gourvenec's return to the Breton club, but a brace from Memphis Depay in between strikes from Houssem Aouar and Maxwell Cornet gave Legon the victory. In the multiplex, Montpellier are finally been beaten as they failed 1-0 at Angers, as Nice managed the same scoreline at Nîmes to get a victory. Saint Etienne made it 2 wins on the bounce with a 2-0 victory over Reims, as Toulouse continued to slide down the table with a 1-0 loss against Amiens. On Sunday, Bordeaux and Caen cancelled each other out in a goalless draw, while Marseille got back to winning ways after being dumped out of the Europa League with a 2-0 result over Dijon. Rennes stopped Nantes' recent winning one, but only managed a 1-1 draw in the Breton derby. Jakob Johansson got the hosts ahead, but the effervescent Emiliano Sala earned the point for Les Canaries. In the late game, Paris Saint-Germain continue to stride forward in Ligue 1 as they never really had to get out of third gear against Monaco, winning 4-0. A hat-trick for Edinson Cavani and a penalty for Neymar alongside a number of VAR decisions that counted goals and didn't count other goals meant that Paris strode to a strong victory. Monaco now winless in their last 16 games. And that's all for now. But to keep you up to date with all the news in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this week with a game from this evening, and we'll be talking around both clubs quite a bit this evening, really. But starting with the game tonight, where PSG, like was mentioned in the news, really didn't have to do much or anything to cut down a lowly Monaco side that's got an injury list as long as my left arm, Adam, and it only keeps growing as it was a couple more injuries tonight. And while it was a shame that it wasn't more competitive, at the same time, Monaco are in some real deep trouble.
They really are. They're in so much trouble. I think the thing that kind of underlined how much trouble they're in and what a bad run they're in and sort of the crisis they're in was Thierry Henry's reaction on the touchlines. He just looked sort of flabbergasted, and there was one point I saw him mouthing "wow" to himself when Jordi Mbula got injured and had to was forced off. It's very difficult to see how Monaco sort of arrest this slide. With the number of injuries they have, they are relying even more so on youth products and kids, teenagers. We saw Wilson Isidore, get his Ligue 1, I think it's his Ligue 1 debut today. Who's 18, and they're starting with Badashile in defence, who's only 17. And when they lacked experience beforehand, at least you could say that some of those players had got some game time under the belts this season. Players like Sofiane Diop, and one or two others. But now they're sort of going to the youth team and having to pick out players from there. So until the injuries and Yuri Tielemans are suspended, I don't see how they could change much at all. And it's just become one of those situations where it's the 16 games winless run and the atmosphere around the club, given the fall they've had from winning the league 18 months ago now. It's just becoming sort of prohibitive and oppressive. It's sort of that sort of depression that kind of has enveloped the club. Is very difficult for them to escape. And confidence in football is, it might be stating obvious, but confidence in football is obviously a huge part of success. And they have no confidence, no quality really of Ligue 1, at least of top half Ligue 1 standard available to them. And averting this up with a manager who's completely untested, untried, has never been in a situation like this before in his career at any club he was at, really. it's going to be very difficult because nobody. It might sound harsh, but nobody kind of knows what they're doing. It's really shocking, and it's sad to see such a sort of a historic club in such turmoil. But I fear for them. They could get relegated. It genuinely could happen, and which would be quite amazing. But it's going to take quite a turnaround for them to get out of this slide.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to talk about Paris Saint-Germain tonight because they didn't really need to do much to win this one, Rich. And they had a couple of goals that were disallowed for VAR. There was a couple of goals that were allowed for VAR. So the topic I want to talk about instead of PSG, for the moment at least, we have plenty of them later to come, but it is VAR because this was probably the biggest game Ligue 1-wise that I've seen, certainly, that's utilised the new system and pretty successful, if all honesty. It didn't take long. They got the right decisions in the end. Can't really grumble. It's showing almost that this is how it should be used.
100%. Ultimately it was called upon for 4 decisions and all 4 were correct. Cavani's first 2 goals were ruled out for offside, went to VAR correctly, that they were then given. Again, the 2 goals that PSG scored, especially the Mbappe goal, it was a shame it was disallowed because the dummy that he produced to create that split second more space to get his shot away was sheer genius, but it was the right call. There's still the odd gremlin. I think there's still just that slight pause too long where nobody truly knows what's going on. I think we saw that for the first Cavani goal. Monaco were preparing to take the free kick from the offside call. There was a pause. Was it going to VAR? Was it not? And eventually, yes, it was given, and it was the correct decision. I've got no problems with that, but we've got a lot of, a lot of people who are going to be against the introduction of VAR, especially in a league like the Premier League. They're going to point to things like that. Oh, we don't want those kind of delays. Well, until the technology gets up to speed even further. And bearing in mind, it's still very new. We're seeing the correct decisions being made. I think that's the main thing. I don't think anyone can argue that actually looking back on those 4 decisions, that the correct decision was made. I think the one that was perhaps slightly curious, and you wonder how far VAR went into reviewing that, was the Jemison and Mbappe coming together, with Jemison going down the back of Mbappe's heel. It looked really bad in slow motion, and you just thought with the sort of yelp that Mbappe gave and how clear it was that he was hurt. Fortunately, nothing too serious, but you just felt that you wouldn't have been surprised, I think, had VAR come in, because it didn't look great. But it was called upon for 4 big decisions, and 4 big decisions it got right, so no complaints there.
Yeah, just ironing out some creases really will help the matter, but a couple of good signs at least. Moving on really to what we wanted to discuss on Thursday, because there was plenty of Champions League action and both these teams were involved. And let's start with Paris Saint-Germain for yourself, Adam. It was a strange midweek really for Paris. It was earlier on in the evening, Liverpool playing Red Star Belgrade, or Cervena Zvezda. We all thought that Liverpool would run out winners, but instead the old giant woke once more and pulled off a result that put a lot less pressure on Paris Saint-Germain in a way, at least. They went 1-0 ahead, but they still managed to only get the 1-1 draw this time. They may be a little bit disappointed they couldn't nick it on the night at least, but at the same time, the point does put them in a decent position. So should they get now we said that the Napoli game would be a big game. It's now the Liverpool game that turns into a big one, because a win there almost puts them through.
Yeah, it's so finely poised, this group, isn't it? That those 3 teams are, and even with Red Star in there now, it's what 6-6, 5-4 in terms of points. With PSG on 5, Red Star on 4, and Napoli and Liverpool at the top. It's so close. And I think I said on the previous podcast, you've got the Europa League favourites in this group, because all 3 of these teams are Champions League knockout sides, at least around a 16 team. So it's unfortunate they've all been drawn in this same group, but that's the nature of this competition, of course. So yeah, I thought I actually was really impressed with PSG for long periods of this game. I felt like in the first half an hour, first half, they were really in control of the game. It was the most mature and professional and sort of solid European away performance, or European performance in general, that against a big side that I've seen them have in the last few years. They looked like they had a plan. They looked like a team for once in the Champions League that knew what they were doing, and it paid off. You know, they perhaps could have scored before Bernat's goal and taking the lead. Thomas Meunier made a couple of wrong decisions when he might have played Neymar and Mbappe in, and they might have had a goal there. But it was a good display, and I think it showed that the Thomas Tuchel effect is happening slowly, but I think that's the right way to go about things, because changing things at PSG is going to be a difficult process. There's a lot of these conflicting agendas at PSG with the hierarchy and QSI and the club itself. Changing the way they do things, even on the pitch, is going to be difficult. So, and I think the way that they've slowly moved to this 3 at the back, which they've now started in the last 3 or 4 games now, they haven't switched back to a 4 for some time. It worked. You know, it was sort of a slow, sort of glacial kind of move from one to the other. To Tuchel trying things out and testing things, and he's sort of getting towards the right balance. And I think the first half against Napoli was a sign of that sort of evolution, which is something that PSG really, really need to focus on. There's so many ingrained issues at that club. But obviously, the second half was slightly different. Napoli, obviously, a very, very good team at home in particular, and PSG struggled to keep them under wraps in the second half, which is no shame. And they're a very, very good team, and that's always going to happen. But there was really good signs for PSG. So I think that in terms of the games to come that you mentioned, yes, that Liverpool game is now huge, because Liverpool's lost, and they were pretty poor in that game. Becomes almost a decider, because you know, I think PSG, I think they will go to Red Star and win, even though the other 2 teams have struggled there. I think that game suits PSG. That's something they're good at, is beating a team that they are clearly better than, you know, on paper than. So I think they should win that game, and it basically comes down to that game in Paris. So really exciting times ahead for observers of French football, because that'd be a great occasion. And Liverpool perhaps were favourites originally for me to win this group, might now be my favourites to go out. So extremely tight, and PSG definitely evolving, and hopefully they can keep that sort of upward trend going.
Yeah, on the other side of the ball tonight, and the other side of everything really, the other night, Rich, was Monaco, who are now out of the Champions League. They're pretty much almost certainly going out of Europe altogether now, with a 4-0 defeat to Club Brugge at home. Regardless of the injuries, it was a bit of an embarrassing performance, really. A lot of soft goals, especially the final one that was the nail in the coffin, really. But it rang alarm bells before tonight, because we knew that they might be in for a bit of a pumping, and that's how it turned out. But out of all the results that have happened recently for Monaco, was this the most disappointing?
I think it certainly ranks as one of them, if not the most disappointing. It was an absolute shambles from the get-go, really. You know, their future in the Champions League was dangling by a thread anyway. And before the game, I thought, well, you know what? Why not just chuck all the kids in? Just give all the youngsters some European experience, and just see how they get on. You know, with a significant injury list, with suspensions coming into play for this weekend's game, you just thought, you know, Henry's going to have to rely on, you know, he's already had to rely on youngsters. He's going to have to rely on more this season, and especially as we subsequently saw with tonight's game. Why not just chuck them in? Instead, he put out what was actually a pretty experienced team. You know, you just had two teenagers supporting Falcao up front. But aside from that, it's a pretty experienced lineup. And yet again, you know, the single biggest issue with Monaco this season have been those senior players failing to perform. You know, you've got a Ligue championship winning defence in Glick and Jemison, and you know they were awful last night. Jemison was, you know, dreadful again tonight. You had Sidibe. We've gone on and on at length about our concerns and issues with regards to his defensive abilities, but you know he was diabolical that night. tonight's performance must rank as one of the worst we have seen in a long time. He was at fault for pretty much every single PSG goal. He just didn't look like he had a clue, didn't look like he cared. Absolute nightmare performance. And it's, as I say, it's those senior players that have they let down Jardim at the start of the season. Things haven't changed with the arrival of Henry. They're letting him down. Henry, of course, is not going to be blameless here, but you've got seasoned, they're veteran status, some of these players, and they've been there, they've done that, they won the league with Monaco, and they're just not performing. Falcao, we've talked before about, is he the same player since he came back from injury? Well, we have seen that, he has reached, or pretty much reached, those levels. But this season, everything just looks so laboured with him. Everything just looks like it's an effort. I'm not going to fault his mentality, but everything just looks sluggish. Movement is slow. He's off the pace with everything. Touch isn't great. Finishing is letting him down, and he's just not one that's working out for. But at least you can see a bit of effort from him. There are other senior players that we saw midweek, that we've seen throughout this season, and that we saw tonight, that are just not putting in the effort, that don't seem to care anymore. Maybe, we can speculate as to the reasons why. Maybe it's that they've seen other younger players join and depart onto pastures new, and it won't have helped that you look at today and Bernardo Silva put in an absolute masterclass for Manchester City against Manchester United, and it's all those what ifs. And you look at some of those players. Sidibe would be a prime candidate for that. He'd been linked with moves to the likes of Arsenal, to the likes of Atletico Madrid. Nothing materialised, and you think now, well, who's going to want him? If I'm a top European club, I'm not going anywhere near him. If I'm a second tier, third tier European club, I'm looking at him thinking, there's better right backs around. There's better right backs around. There's better right backs in Monaco's own team. So you just think, as a result of those players coming and going, left some feeling a little disillusioned, perhaps a bit of frustration, bit of anger. We saw it in parts with someone like Thomas Lemar last season. He didn't get his move the previous summer, and his form was affected by that. And he wasn't anywhere near his best. He obviously was fortunate to subsequently get his move. But yeah, there's too many senior players. You can't fault the youngsters. It's impossible to fault 17 and 18-year-olds. You just can't. For me, the vast majority of the mess that Monaco are in has to fall, and the responsibility has to fall at the feet of those senior players.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is really disappointing that they were awful in that game. And you raised a good question, really, Rich, whether they should have started the young ones in that, and the pressure would be to start them in the next two games. But would that at the same time be throwing these poor lads to the wolves against a Dortmund side that can't stop scoring, and an Atletico Madrid side that I don't know, it's almost like a gladiator walking into the pits of the lions, isn't it? It's just a constant battle when you're playing a team like Madrid, and it's maybe not the easiest breeding ground for them, but maybe something they're going to have to walk through. And in fact, they're probably going to have to walk through in Ligue 1 with the amount of injuries that all sides of the ball have got at the moment, really, for them. It's a real mess there. Do start worrying about them. Let's talk about off the field stuff now, because there's been a lot on the recent football leaks happening with Der Spiegel and a lot of translations to France, at least, that we've been using from our colleagues at Mediapart. There's a few we want to go through tonight, Adam, but let's start with the one that also involves the English club Manchester City in the FFP rules. Now, there's been mentionings from the Football League's side of things that both Infantino and Platini, while they were at UEFA, making, shall we say, allow cutting deals with Paris Saint-Germain so they could skirt rules, make sponsorships seem larger, etc., etc. They were paying less for taxes for different things. Little ways they would try and get around these FFP rules. What do you think about this one, really? There's a couple more that are, the next one especially we'll talk about is particularly shameful, but this one, it's a showing that the clubs aren't UEFA at least aren't taking FFP seriously in a sense of for other clubs' sake. But at the same time, is this really surprising news to yourself, Adam, that they're skirting around the rules for financial fair play?
Unfortunately, it's not particularly surprising. I think that if there's anything that has sort of been an overriding feeling of the running of football at that sort of level over the last 5 to 10 years, is that this kind of thing is endemic, and the fact that UEFA would make these sort of these headlines isn't surprising at all. We given what we've seen with FIFA and Sepp Blatter and the corruption issues surrounding FIFA there. It's just becoming very frustrating, because I think you hope that, given the history of the game that we love and that we support and that we watch, and the amount of scrutiny that it is under, that the running of the game would be extremely well policed and be extremely well transparent, which obviously is not the case. And despite the attempts made over the last 5 to 10 years to change that, was obviously the issues at FIFA and people changing and supposedly procedures changing, it seems that nothing actually, in terms of attitude and in terms of the way the people in charge of the game go about their business, their attitude hasn't really changed. And that is the thing that is most disappointing, that despite all of the issues surrounding FIFA over the past few years, you would have felt that at the very least would have been a wake-up call to those in charge, that they could not continue in a similar vein. And it feels like, assuming that the Football League stories are entirely valid, that nothing has changed, and they haven't really taken that on board. So moving on to the whether they take FFP seriously, I'm not all that surprised by that either, because at the time when it was brought in, I had this feeling that the clubs are what make UEFA, the clubs, the celebrity status of the players, and the wealth and importance and marketability of the clubs are what make the Champions League great, not UEFA itself. So the clubs need money to sustain this model, and they need they need a very similar sort of style to NFL franchise ownership, which is kind of what's developed, and FFP conflicts directly with that. And it just felt like that they were almost, shooting themselves in the foot a little bit, given that you felt that the Champions League is a success because these clubs are behemoth, entities, and to try and change that, although the intention in principle is the right thing for the fans, you would imagine, and given the history of the game and the development of youth players and the importance to various communities in for these teams, that it was in conflict to the way the game was going. So that the fact that they perhaps haven't taken it as seriously, assuming again that everything is valid here, isn't a surprise. So so basically, I'm not surprised, and I wouldn't be surprised if further reports were emerged with similar clubs and other clubs and other high profile officials. It's just something that is going to be very difficult to change in the long run, and it's not, apparently it can't be done as quickly as a year or two. It's going to be a generational thing.
Yeah, and it looks like some ulterior, outside properties that are trying to help up above FFP in terms of the CFBC and stuff are still sort of chasing Paris Saint-Germain, and they tried to mend their books and bits like that. So there may be progress going nowadays, but it's not a surprise that if these reports are true and do obviously mention that these are reported things from the Football League's side of things. This isn't to say that any of these are true, to make sure we can cover our own backs nicely on this one. But
I was sort of trying to sort of weave that in, assuming
but,
this is the truth.
Yes, disclaimer, with assuming these are true, at least anyway, with us in the point of the discussion, but these are obviously reported bits from the Football Leagues, and we take no responsibility on the authenticity of the content, so do keep that in mind. But the one that has been at least confirmed by the club, Rich, and this is the shocking one, really, is that PSG were alleged to have a youth recruitment policy that discriminated against ethnic minorities since 2013 to spring this year. There was players that they would look at that they would not make an offer to him because of the club, because he was maybe black or other ethnicities. A disgraceful action from the club that since then Paris Saint-Germain have confirmed that they're aware of something that happened with their scouting forms, but do point to that being a rogue individual, so we'll take them for their word for that. But regardless of the employment of that person, and hopefully he has gone, they've not confirmed or denied whether that is the case. I've not seen anything anywhere, but Rich, it's appalling, isn't it?
Oh, it's dreadful. It's as you say, it's absolutely shocking. We go back, to 1998 and the issues that the squad faced then with the various nationalities that made up the squad and the ethnicities that made up and worked so well to bring World Cup glory. We then had in I think it was 2011. The quota scandal under the Laurent Blanc regime with the French national setup. And then we have this, France's biggest team, and it's leaked that they have a scout. Supposedly they're pinning, it seems as though they're looking to pin this on this, as you say, this rogue scout that effectively was adopting a principle of, I'm not going to be reporting back or looking to recommend certain players based on their ethnicity, which is, it's appalling to hear in this day and age. You look at, everything that's gone through in the world of football and policies that have been brought in place to prevent this kind of thing, and it's just dreadful that something like this has happened. As I say, at such a huge club. It's Yan Gaboho, he's now at Rennes, is the player that seems to have unfortunately sort of fallen victim to this sort of prejudice scouting. But it's dreadful. You just read the reports and you just think at first you think, I hope this is just silly speculation and actually, there's nothing gone on here. But PSG, contrary to other reports, have come out, they came out pretty quick to confirm that actually, this has taken place. It was a rogue scout, and we are conducting an internal investigation. But I suppose the worry, the sort of question that you ask yourself is, if it was a rogue agent, rogue scout, why wasn't that internal investigation, taken place when it happened, or have PSG only found out via these football leagues? It certainly doesn't read as though they've only just found out via these football leagues necessarily. The football leagues detail a meeting that took place between various people within the PSG scouting setup and youth team setup. And, it's some of it on one hand, it's good to see that people were, questioning this policy and, are you serious? Is this, we're here to find players based on talent. That's it. Ethnicity, religious backgrounds, cultural backgrounds is irrelevant. We're here to find players based on talent. But, the sort of transcript from that meeting does seem to suggest it is just this agent who's pushing this policy of, there are, in his mind, that there were too many people of African and Caribbean origin within the sort of Paris area, and that they wanted to only look at players who were not part of that ethnicity. You know, you have to think if it's a rogue scout, you know, shameful on PSG that he's got to that level with those kind of beliefs. If that's not working, if that's not bad enough, you know, the fear, of course, is that is he just a, you know, you obviously can only speculate, and as you know, with the caveat as you said before, but you fear, is this going on at other clubs? Are there more people linked to it within PSG? How big is that problem? You know, much has been made of the sort of rise of the far right across Europe, but especially with Front National in France, and you just fear, you know, if things like this are creeping back into football, you know, it's a shameful thing if it's happened. We can only hope this is just one, you know, idiot with such a dreadful opinion, and we can only hope that PSG do the necessary to ensure that he is properly dealt with if he hasn't been already, and that this is not, you know, something that we need to be fearing is spreading more and more. Because if it is, then you know there is a big problem here. If this itself isn't as big enough, so it is absolutely shameful that this kind of thing has still been going on. So yeah, we can only hope that this is just one idiot, but we'll just have to wait and see, unfortunately.
Yeah, really, fingers crossed, because I mean, it's despicable, isn't it? Really, it should not be happening, and the hope is, like you say, Rich, that it's not systematic of anyone else at Paris Saint-Germain, and I really hope not. But number two, hopefully this man is completely done with football. Really, we don't need people like that in our game. Should be really employed ever again. On to the final bit of football leaks resulting in Paris Saint-Germain, because they were really the, shall we say, hot topic on this one, really, Adam, for at least French views, and that's the secrets behind the transfer of Kylian Mbappe. There's a nice long lengthy piece on our website if you want to check that out, but basically a lot was demanded of Mbappe ever since he was around about 14, really, regardless of where he was going. But the important was, at least for now, really, was that a deal was pretty much agreed with Real Madrid up until the last moment, and then it ended up moving to Paris Saint-Germain. So some things could have been very differently, but the demands really as well were pretty extraordinary. That's probably why Real Madrid sort of shied away from it now, and Paris Saint-Germain had to talk them down from some crazy ones, from the fact that his father wanted them to pay for the stadium, a new stadium for the team he grew up with, which is against rules, and chartered planes, etc., and a number of different things. It's all reads a little, if true, absolutely insane, doesn't it? I mean, even the fact that at the start of the summer, when he did leave, Mbappe was pretty pleased to spend another year at the Stade Louis II should he need to, but his father certainly wanting the move and wanting the cash, because there's plenty of cash involved, and to the point where plenty of big rich owners were pretty unwilling to bend to the will. Yeah,
it's insane. It's quite shocking, really. Some of the things that kind of have sort of emerged from this, and the demands that were made. I think, though, it's kind of a sign of just modern football, which almost sounds like an excuse, but it really shouldn't be. But I mean, footballers are often berated for earning, you know, obscene amounts of money and doing very, very little for it, which is not true for a start. They're doing the thing that they love in most cases. You know, they have very hectic lifestyles and busy schedules during the season, and a lot is expected of them. And the amount of money in football that they're going to be paid those sort of sums of money. So I think that, unfortunately, it's just something that is on the upward trend, and it is going to continue like this. And the rise of sort of the super agents, sort of George Mendes and guys of that sort of ilk, mean that these sort of contract dealings are just becoming the norm. And I have a feeling that although Mbappe is almost the at the zenith of the sort of modern football sort of wave, if you like, being the age that he is and the way he came through and the huge transfer fee that took him from Monaco to PSG and obviously his success at the World Cup, he's obviously going to be at the peak of this. I have a feeling that you would expect that transfers of a similar style, of a similar player, so a similar sort of attention would have similar causes and similar discussions, and offers would be made of a similar style. So we just happen to know about the Mbappe ones because they've obviously come out assuming again that these are true for the football leaks this week. So I think that unfortunately these sort of over the top demands are becoming more common simply because they can be met, and football clubs at the top level of the game, the European Super League is obviously one that came out, the headline thing that came out of this football leaks stories. All these clubs can afford to pay, or at least some of them can afford to pay these obscene amounts of money. And although some may have turned their nose up them at in this juncture, they might not have much of a choice in the near future. And PSG obviously the one of the clubs that can afford to pay these clauses and these sums of money. And obviously we're very happy to in this case, but I think it's just a sign of the way the football is going, and we shouldn't expect or be surprised at these bizarre demands, because I imagine they're more commonplace than is being let on, and they're only going to be even more common. So I think it's just a sign of the way the game is going. But reading through them and checking out the GFFN Twitter feed for the specifics is really, really interesting, just to see the discussions that are had. But I don't see it changing anytime soon. I think this is probably just a sign of a greater trend.
Yeah, indicative. And I suppose the only poor thing for poor Mbappe is he's caught up in the middle of it. Yeah, I suppose he wasn't really privy to too much of these discussions from the looks of things, and it also explains maybe why he donated plenty of his salary for the France one to the charity team, because he certainly doesn't need it, at least anyway, really, more than anything. But credit to him doing it anyway. But
yeah, absolutely.
But there's clear reason why how modern football is going. I'm sure some people will be turning in their graves, really. Let's get back to football matters then, really, now, and talking about the other team involved in Champions League football is obviously Monaco and Paris Saint-Germain, where they played on Saturday as well in Lyon, who got a lucky win, some might say, or at least a strong win in the end against Guingamp at the weekend. But let's focus on their game midweek, Rich, against Hoffenheim, where yet again, against the German side, they managed to get themselves in front, and then yet again they managed to somehow weasel their way out of a victory in the end, even with the Hoffenheim down to 10 men. In the last second, Padejarback puts them back into the game, 2-2, and Lyon, from looking like they were pretty much through, now have to face a gauntlet against Manchester City again, before facing Shakhtar on the final day, which may leave the fate out of their hands depending on the other result.
Yeah, I mean, it's really frustrating because they've in both games against Hoffenheim, they've done the hard work. They played well, especially in that first game, in Germany. They played so well, and then that game and the game during the week, they switched off at 90 minutes, and both times they've been punished. And as I say, it's really frustrating because they've played good stuff. They have played good stuff, and really, they should be qualified already. They should be able to now, sit back and enjoy the visit of Manchester City in a couple of weeks or so time. It's safe in the knowledge that qualification is in the bag. It's now not. It now means, there is a chance they might need, a result of sorts against Manchester City, because it's certainly not going to be easy to go to the Ukraine on the final match day. So it's a bit of a shambles that they could have could be leaving themselves in that, because in all honesty, just cumulatively across those two matches, 4 or 5 more minutes concentration, and instead of 2 points in the bag, they'd have had 6. By and large, across the course of both games, they, you'd struggle to argue that they wouldn't deserve at least one of the wins. Arguably both wins, but if you're going to switch off, they switched off in that game in Germany, didn't learn their lesson. That's the real disappointing part, is that they didn't learn their lesson. They fought back really well in Germany, and to go 3-2 up with seconds left, really, and to face the disappointment of only coming away with a point meant be on your guard, concentrate for the full game. Don't just concentrate for 90 minutes. You've got to remember there's going to be added on time. So to have done it again, there have to be question marks over the team. There have to be, but it's if they don't qualify from this group, then Genesio, if he's not under pressure already, which he. You speak to Lyon fans, he is. He is going to be under pressure, because Champions League was something that they were really targeting for. To have opened up with that, fantastic win in Manchester, you thought, crikey, they've the most difficult game of the group, and they've got 3 points. Maybe they should be going on to qualify from here. And to have thrown away winning positions with seconds left in 2 consecutive games now is a real issue, I think.
Not ideal at all. And yes, Genesio will be under plenty of pressure. But the topic really on the game from Saturday afternoon isn't Lyon, really. It's the team they beat in the end in Guingamp. Adam, we speculated that despite how well he had done previously and his reputation, that Kumbare might be treading a tightrope, and that ended up being the case. Midweek, he was given his marching orders, and replacing him is Jocelyn Gourvenec. It's an interesting move for both club and manager, because arguably for the club, they know exactly what he's bringing. He's a good quality manager that did terrifically last time for them, but Gourvenec maybe feels like a little bit of a step backwards for him in a way. It's not much of a sideways step that we may have thought he would have taken. But what do you think to the move for both parties involved?
It's an interesting one. I think it's difficult to know where Guingamp are sort of thinking with this, because Gourvenec got them promoted previously to Ligue, and obviously won the Coupe de France, which was a huge success. Getting to European knockout stages, again, a huge success. I'm just wondering whether they're sort of hoping he might be able to do it again, because Guingamp, if you look at their squad, they sold Jimmy Briand, top goal scorer last season, Clement Grenier, who was very, very good for them last season in creating from midfield, Yannis Celeber, and the only real player to come in the other direction of note is Ronnie Rodelin, who hasn't really hit the ground running and has been injured a substantial amount. He's missed 7 games already this season for injury. So they are very thin on the ground in terms of quality. And you take Rodelin and perhaps even just Rodelin out of that team, and it looks like a Ligue 2 team. So I would argue that they're given their sort of transfer business, they're playing at a Ligue 2 kind of standard. They've got Ligue 2 quality, and I don't see how they get out of this situation without significant investment in the winter, which is unlikely, and it may even be too late by then. As we saw with Metz last winter, when they were very far back and they had a run and it trailed off, and they ended up finishing comfy bottom by the end of the season. And I have a feeling as well that the sacking of Kumbare might have been slightly short-sighted, because if they are going to stay in this division, he is a man who is very well respected, a very, very good coach, knows the league inside out, and he's been in this position before, and he had overtly switched setup and philosophy and his attitude towards games, moving to 5-4-1. They were undefeated in 5 games, only winning 1 of those, but they've become very difficult to beat. And although they got absolutely torn apart by Nantes last weekend, who obviously are on a very good run of form, Vasil Halihodzic has done a really good job, and the Guingamp are not the only team that they've been sort of putting a number of goals past. Beat Toulouse 4-0, beat Montpellier 3-0 in the cup. I just feel like he had the right idea, and he is the type of coach that is capable of saving a team like this from relegation, as difficult as it would be. And he was going in the right direction. So I think it may have been a little, although we've discussed it before, given their results were so poor and they're traditionally, since being promoted, a mid-table side, lower mid-table, that he might go. I think it may have been a little bit rash in getting rid of Kombare, because I don't know that Gorvanek in this situation is an upgrade on Kombare. So for Gorvanek, I think this is the kind of job he was going to have to take, sort of a lower third league and team, given how it turned out at Bordeaux. It never really got going there. And Guingamp is the only real success he's had in the top flight. So returning to a club of a similar stature, exactly the same stature, it turns out, made sense. So I think for him, it fits. But for the club, I don't know that Gorvanek has had any success in this sort of situation. And I felt Kombare was going in the right direction. So I'm not surprised, but I think it may prove to be an error in the long run.
Yeah, it's an interesting move for both parties. But let's talk about Kombare briefly, at least, anyway, Rich, in terms of the contribution he did bring to Guingamp. Obviously, he's been sort of a journeyman around a few Ligue 1 clubs, but this was one of his longer stints, and did pretty well. He kept them into their mid-table spot when many thought that once Jocelyn Gorvanek had gone, that they would dip significantly. But he did an excellent job in bringing through players, in wheeling and dealing, you may say, in the transfer market. I'm thinking of bringing through the right kind of players to the club that just kept them above water. Plenty of times there was a couple of minor scary moments, but there was nothing that significantly worried them until this season. And in all honesty, it won't be surprising to see him pop up again in Ligue 1 when there is a vacancy open.
Yeah, I'd fully expect him to. He's a very experienced coach. It may be Ligue 2 that he pops up in, but he will be back. I think with Guingamp, it was just simply a case of the way that club is run, with obviously such a limited budget. They can only bring in a certain caliber of player. They can only spend a certain amount on a particular kind of player as well. Meant that it was always going to be a fine line between sort of success, which for Guingamp was just I think retaining league and status, and also ultimately failure. And ultimately, I think Kombare has just paid the price for that fine line, flirting to a little too close for comfort, I think, to the relegation side of things. I think it would be difficult to say whether, if he was given the course of the season, he would get that team back on track. I think that's quite tough. I'm actually of the belief, I think, that the rehiring of Gorvanek is a good move. I think it just brings back a little bit of positivity, I think, and a bit of good feel back to the club. He's obviously such a legend with the for what he did with the club in his first stint. But you can't knock what Kombare did. It is a tough job. You've got to be an excellent coach. You've got to be able to identify that certain kind of player that Guingamp can bring in. They're not going to bring in these amazing world-class players. He needs to be able to identify and bring in solid players who can do a job in Liga. You look at, I suppose the big one that you look at there was actually a bit of a coup, really. I think was bringing in Clément Grenier last season. It wasn't too long ago, obviously before all his injuries, that he was touted as arguably one of the next big things from the Lyon Academy. So unfortunately, injuries meant that never really turned out to be the case. But I still felt it was something of a statement signing, I think, for Guingamp. And there's no disrespect to him, but a club like Guingamp could bring in a player like Grenier, even with all his injuries. And credit to Kombare, because he worked with Grenier. He got his fitness back. He got him playing excellent football again. Scoring great goals, being influential in the middle of the pitch. Sadly, of course, that meant that he obviously attracted the eyes of other teams, and he moved on in the summer to Rennes. But that kind of signing and that ability to develop players, I don't necessarily think Kombare is the man to bring through young players. I think we look at the likes of Ludovic Blas and Marcus Coco. We've spoken quite a few years now of these are talented youngsters, but they still remain just potentially talented youngsters. I don't necessarily think they have fully kicked on. So perhaps there was that question mark over Kombouare, but ultimately it's difficult to knock anybody with that Guingamp job. Such a tough job that it is, and to have lasted a couple of seasons and kept them in the top flight. You can't argue that it was anything but a success. But as I say, I think he was just flirting a little bit too close for comfort, with the fear that this this run of poor form could have ultimately led to relegation.
Yeah, let's see if they can maybe turn things around under new management. We shall wait and see, certainly. On to our final topic tonight before we, at least very quickly, before we go to our Ligue and snapshots, and that's that we go to our final international break of 2018, at least anyway, heading up. And it's an interesting one for France. It will be the culmination of the Nation Leagues for everyone, but the squad has stayed pretty similar, really. There's only a couple of new names into the mix, really, and that obviously may change depending on injuries and so forth. But the big headline one that I want to mention really on this one, Adam, is the reintroduction of Anthony Martial, who's had a terrific month or so with Manchester United, a few goals, grabbed the penalty this evening as well for them to add to his tally, but he's resurged in confidence. He's got a resurgent confidence from Jose Mourinho himself as well, and that's really earned him a callback, which it feels like it's well deserved.
It really is well deserved. As fellow Manchester United fans, Nathan, as you can tell by my thick Mancunian accent, I've been really excited to see him play regularly and to see him playing on the front foot and to see him regaining confidence over the last month or so. And it is a very much well deserved call up back to the squad. I think that the thing that's really stood out with him over the last 6 weeks or so is his finishing. Obviously, he's scoring a lot more goals than he has in the past. Perhaps when he's been used, obviously he's still used on the wing, but used sparingly and out the team and lacking confidence, and talk about him leaving and wanting to leave and asking to leave. And it feels like that confidence is returning, and he's been given the chance to play a little bit higher up the pitch in a perhaps a bit more a flatter 4-3-3 with Pogba, Herrera, Matic, Fellaini in those three midfield positions. Him and Rashford, very pacey wingers, supporting Lukaku or Lingard in certain situations, Mata in there too. And he's doing what he does best, which is score goals. And the thing that's frustrated me up until this point is since Louis van Gaal left, he has been used as a winger and hasn't had as much chance to be in the position to take chances, having to do a lot more defensive work. Because for me, he is a central striker. He's a player that should be playing as a number 9 in the central position. He should be playing in the middle of those three forwards, because I think one-on-one he's actually not great. When he faces up a fullback, he's very fast, but I honestly don't think he's got too many tricks, and I don't think he's too skillful in that situation. But what he is good at is working an angle, working a shooting opportunity, and finishing off. He was great like that at Monaco. Played up front for Monaco most of the time. Was great in his first season at Man United. He was our top goal scorer, and the fact that he's been given those chances more often is directly responsible for this upward curve. So it's great to see him back in both the Manchester United team and in the France squad, and hopefully he will emigrate back to a central striking role, maybe even before the season's out, with Lukaku out of form and him being a little bit more conducive to some of the more counter-attacking setups that Mourinho puts out, especially in bigger games. So it's great to see him realizing that talent to some extent, or he's looking like he will, given that he had dropped off a little bit and there was talk about him leaving. So it's great to see.
Absolutely. And it'd be interesting to see how Deschamps tries to use him if he does bring him on for any of these games coming up. Rich, I want to very quickly talk about an admission, because I'm sure Arsenal fans will not really want me to discuss Anthony Martial's successful return, because someone missing maybe from this, who has had a great couple of months, is Alexandre Lacazette, who scored plenty of goals for Arsenal as well, and has been in the France team before, but can't seem to get a look in now. Some people are pointing to the fact that Thauvin maybe not been as great lately. I know that Deschamps loves Giroud, but he's also not really played for Chelsea up until the last week or so. Is he maybe a bit unlucky to miss out, even though there is there's such an amount of quality going forward for France?
Yeah, I think he is. I think the big one will be to see, as you rightly touched on, will be to see how and if Deschamps uses Martial in a central role. As Adam pointed out, that is where Martial, I think, plays his best stuff. And if Deschamps utilises Martial through the middle, then if I'm Lacazette, I'm sitting here thinking there's not much more I can do. Martial, you would have thought, looking at the squad, Martial has been bought to potentially play out wide, which, of course, you can make the argument that Lacazette can do that. That's where he started, but no doubt that Lacazette is a central striker. I'd like to have seen him rewarded with a call up here. I think his form has deserved it. I think there are, Thauvin, as you say, he's not at his, he's not at last season's form with Marseille. But it's also, it's unfortunate that he's only had very limited opportunity and has not been able to take those opportunities when they've come about. But I'd like to have seen Lacazette involved in some way. Martial has, he obviously fell out of favour at Manchester United, found game time at a premium, and that cost him his place in the France squad. Lacazette has consistently been playing. There's a couple of games at the start of this season with Arsenal where, he was just sort of finding his feet under Emery, but, his feet have firmly been found, and, he's back to his goal scoring best. He's even forced Aubameyang out wide because, Lacazette is such a force through the middle. I just feel that over the course of last season being his first in England and the start that he's made this season, I just felt the time might have been right to reward him with a call up. And I'm not going to be questioning Deschamps. I'm one of Deschamps' biggest fans, but there's a question mark over what does Lacazette have to do, or what do other people have to not do to be dropped to bring Lacazette up. And then, of course, the other one, which may or may not have come onto, the other big one, of course, is Laporte at the back. You look at the form that he's had this season, arguably been the best centre-back in the Premier League, and he's still not able to get a place in Deschamps' squad. The Sarko, who is, he is a huge Deschamps favourite. We can't deny that. But he's not. I don't think he's necessarily a player for the future, and especially if it means that we're missing out on Laporte in that squad. He was a top class defender in Spain. Deschamps didn't give him his opportunity. He's moved to England, and now he's showing form in England of just what a top quality centre back he is. So that's I think him and Lacazette were the two big omissions for me that I'm now struggling to find justifications why they're not in the squad, and are the two that I'd probably just be questioning Deschamps slightly over.
Yeah, I wonder if Laporte will start trying to pick up the phone to Luis Enrique instead. Should things not sort of transpire a little bit more with the French squad moving forward? But well, let's hope he does get called up with his current form. Finishing off with our Ligue snapshots then, and I'll start with yourself, Adam. What haven't we talked about this week that our Ligue fans should know about?
I wanted to talk about sort of three at the back and a couple of comparable displays which really kind of stood out for me in the last week by very sort of similar players in terms of their stature. Monaco at Reims when they lost 1-0 last weekend, I think it was, moved to a 3 at the back, and they used Kamil Glik as the right side of a 3-man defence, which, in just saying it out loud, seems ridiculous. And obviously it didn't really work out, and he was exposed for the goal. And obviously Reims won 1-0 and looked completely shaky in that position, which seemed perfectly natural. And then because he's obviously a slower defender these days, someone that's leads by example, directs, is very good in the air, is an intelligent defender, but can be exposed by pace and isn't the most mobile, which you play at the right or left side of a 3, you kind of have to be. He seems naturally suited to the centre. But then Marseille have played 3 at the back in the last few games, which seems to be, you know, with PSG moving in that direction, a number of teams, obviously it's becoming a little bit more fashionable in European football. Marseille played away at Montpellier, away at Lazio in a similar setup, and again today against Dijon. Now, they weren't brilliant against Dijon today. They won 2-0. Dijon, obviously, 10 games without a win now, I think, in the league. Only 2 points in that time. You know, so it's not exactly a huge watermark, but they used Adel Rami in the same position on the right-hand side of a 3, which when I saw that in the week against Lazio, where he also played that position, I felt that was borderline suicidal, given that Kamil Glik is a very similar player. They have very similar skill sets. Rami, again, not particularly mobile, and could easily be exposed there. But he's actually adapted to that role pretty well, and I sort of wanted to give him a sort of some praise and say that I was actually quite impressed with how he played against Lazio in the week and how well he did this afternoon in that role, and he scored both goals, which obviously isn't really much to do with him playing as the right side of a 3-man defense. But I think that he's the type of player that perhaps gets a little bit of stick because he's sort of been around a while. He's obviously getting towards the end of his career. He's 32, and he isn't particularly mobile, and you know, pace does expose him to some extent. But I think he's shown in both those 2 games, although obviously they lost in Rome in the week, that he has still something to offer to at this level, and can adapt, and is capable of being that intelligent defender that perhaps was the case previously, and is able to cover for his colleagues and be mobile enough. He's not very mobile at all, but is able to use that intelligence and to fill those gaps. So I just wanted to sort of highlight the fact that he's played well in that role, and is still an important part of this Marseille squad. So fair play, basically.
Rich, what's your snapshot this week?
It's Patrick Vieira, I think, slowly but surely finding his feet with Nice, whilst Thierry Henry sort of flounders with Monaco. Vieira has found the classic Arsenal recipe of winning 1-0. It seems their 1-0 win over Nîmes at the weekend was their 3rd on the trot. It's winning ugly. You know, they're not playing particularly attractive football. They're not necessarily even playing particularly well, but they're grinding out wins. And after a really, really sluggish start to the season, where they went four games without winning, you know, they're slowly but surely have crept up the table. They're now sitting 7th, and you know, you just feel that with a bit of backing then in the upcoming transfer window, you know, that winning ugly recipe can turn into, you know, winning attractively. And so it's as I say, it's a new young manager, new manager to the league, finding his feet. Yeah, things are slowly, I think, turning round for Vieira and Nice.
Yeah, I think 1-0 to the UGC has a bit of a ring to it, at least, anyway. It sounds very similar to what we used to hear, at least, anyway, or he might have heard, at least. That's all that we have time for this week. My thanks to Rich, Adam, and all of you listening at home. There'll be no preview show this Thursday, as it's the international break, so do join us again for the main show, which will be back at the same time, same place next week. A bientôt, and goodbye.